Welcome to Hanszen College. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm Fabiola Lopez-Duran, an Associate Professor of Art and Architectural History at the Art History Department here at Rice University and College Magister at Hanszen College. We are delighted to be here with all of you today to share very exciting news about Hansen. But before we begin, let me give you a sense of how the next 90 minutes are going to go. We are going to begin with the presentation of the architectural project for the new residential building at Hansen, designed by Berlin-based architectural firm Barkow-Leibinger, which we are expecting to inaugurate in less than 2 years during the fall semester of 2022. This presentation will be followed by a Q&A section, so please write your questions in the Q&A setting at the bottom of the screen, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. Then we will have our second presentation on the work of two international artists who has been selected as finalists for a new artwork for the Rice Public Art Collection, which will be located here at Hansen. So the project of our new residential building will be presented by Frank Barkow himself, the founder and partner at Barkow-Leibinger. Frank was educated here in the US at Montana State University and at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University. He's a professor, a researcher, and a practicing architect who currently teaches at Princeton University School of Architecture. Today, we are also joined by a terrific group of students who has been participating in this process from the very beginning and who will be more than happy to answer questions after the presentations. Let me briefly introduce them so you know who they are. Nikita Gangla, President of Hanszen College, who will be moderating the Q&A section. And Rose Click, Lauren Ivory, Syed Shan, I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly your name, Shan, sorry, and Jeffrey Salgado, members of the alumni committee at the new Hansen committee. And last but not least, the magician that has made all of this possible, N.C. Gilmore, the Assistant Director of Project Management and Engineering here at Rice, and the chair of the new Hansen Wing Steering Committee. So without further introductions and honor, I'm very happy to welcome Frank Barkow. You can share your screen.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Fabiola, for the wonderful introduction. Also, thanks to Ansi, who's here today. We've been working extremely closely together on this project for some years now. I'm joining you from snowy Bozeman, Montana today, so I think the time zone is a little more favorable to this presentation today. So I'm really happy to, and it's really a pleasure to be able to show you what we've been up to on this project, how the project's developed, which we've been working on intensely these past months. What I wanted to do was to begin quickly with a kind of overview of our work. As Fabiola was saying, we're a research-based office. We've been just completing an exhibition in Berlin at the Haus am Waldsee. It's a 19th century villa called Revolutions of Choice, which was an idea of showing our practice profile, how we work experimentally, how we work in different materials, and different tools to produce our architecture. So you see the museum in the background. In the foreground is a wall, 2 walls made out of infralight concrete, which is a self-insulated concrete, which is sand and stone cast to produce this sort of entrance sequence. So this is an idea of sort of both high technology and low technology, very archaic form of producing walls. And then bringing our work out of archives, models, experiments, material samples into the museum space. Again, only as a kind of example to show the emphasis on research, how that's developed and how that's shown in a kind of retrospective museum setting. I mean, this is important for me. I began as a carpenter in the Rocky Mountains, where I grew up, and opening a practice in Berlin with Regina Leibinger was important. And this was kind of a foundation to how we've worked over the past 20 or 30 years in the practice. This is a pavilion that we moved from Serpentine Galleries in London, rebuilt in Berlin as a kind of prototype, as kind of experimental idea of creating form and space in the setting of this really beautiful garden there. So as an example of the way we work, this diagram, and a bit academically, is, as I think Fabiola was saying, that we're working between research, academic teaching at Princeton, where we've been heading up studios on housing, affordable housing, and the practice, which is primarily based in Berlin, Germany. So as a kind of way of working between these kind of work areas. Timber, which I wanted to give a kind of background, what we've been doing on timber in the last few years. I got tapped on the shoulder by Sarah Whiting a few years ago, who was the dean of the architecture program at Rice, who asked me if we had done any timber buildings. And I said, sure, we've got plenty of them. So these are examples of some of the ideas we've been working with in timber. Again, thinking about timber as a modern material, as a forward-looking material, as a kind of futuristic material, even in terms of its sustainability and its sort of ease of working with, and ultimately earmarked for this project for Hansen. So this is an example of a cantina, a kind of event space in Stuttgart, Germany, where we use glulam construction in conjunction with steel. This is glulam, and it's also CNC, or digitally drawn and cut, prefabricated outside of Stuttgart in the Black Forest. This serves as a kind of social space for industrial campus. This is where everybody meets: white collar, blue collar workers, clients, the employees of this company. So as a kind of common space, it was important for us. But it's also a building where we started producing buildings which could be digitally fabricated off-site. So we could design the building and actually design and fabricate and execute these components of a building through our own design, in a sense, creating our own building catalog for our own buildings. The Serpentine Summer House was, again, you saw a version of that earlier. Was the pavilion, again, a kind of experimental pavilion project as a prototype. It could expand, it could get bigger. This was built for the Serpentine Galleries for Julia Peyton-Jones for her summer house program as a temporary structure within the beautiful Kensington Parks, as a temporary structure, which we then later moved to Berlin, but really to test the limits of material, in this case, steel under construction with plywood, the limits of bending it, how that can be used with a particular scale, how it conditions light, how it comes through. But through the very simple exercise of simply folding and looping a material around itself. So the practice is, in that sense, very much hands-on. This sort of temple-like building in the Swiss Alps is actually a factory. The Swiss are great workers of wood, so they were very happy to create this kind of post and beam structure out of local timber, which was then glue laminated and built in a very simple kind of beam and column system for flexible industrial spaces. The building could be fabricated very quickly. It could be fabricated and put up very economically. So in a way, these are some of the first projects where we cut our teeth on this idea of prefabricated timber or wood construction, also for other campus settings, such as for Fraunhofer, which is a famous German research institution for their campus in Bavaria, also in a very beautiful Bavarian, sort of village alpine situation. This is an image which shows how those buildings are built, where we build timber components off-site. They're prefabricated and then brought on-site so that these buildings can be built very quickly and very beautifully. This is the entrance sequence. You can also see it in relationship to the historical buildings around it, these agricultural buildings and barns, and also the idea of a timber structure as a kind of common space which unites the four dormitory spaces and laboratory spaces for Fraunhofer as a kind of collective gathering and event space within this collective. So these are, examples in the last 5-10 years of projects that we've been doing, including very recent ones, such as this small daycare or kindergarten adjacent to this factory in Stuttgart, with both green roofs that we plant, as well as prefabricated wood components for these small children, for their classrooms, meeting spaces, play spaces for gathering. But again, a building that could be built off-site and brought on-site quickly and put together quite quickly and economically. The other idea, I think, of timber is like the exhibition we had in Berlin. This one for the Chicago Architectural Biennale is to think maybe a bit more utopian, the idea of timber high-rises. This is something we tried for Sid Rich. We're not quite that far with building legislation, but this is an idea for a high-rise for affordable housing. In this case, very simple, using log construction that's stacked over each other. Timber is very available and very cheap in places like Berlin, as an idea for a future, in a way, kind of project in the works or on the boards for an idea for housing. So it's both a kind of very pragmatic, research-based project, but also one that's forward-looking. So with that as a kind of background to our work and our research, I wanted to focus now on Hansen, the new residential building or wing that we've been working really hard on for the last few months. To give you a little background on how the project was started, we went back and looked at some of the histories of Rice. We looked back at the Beaux-Arts, which Beaux-Arts plan from 1910. Beaux-Arts was sort of the French education of these large axial symmetrical master planning. Over time, that master plan has evolved and changed quite a bit from the original conception of it. At the same time, some of these ideas are still in place. The north-south and east-west axes are still in place. The residential colleges are still located at the sort of edges of the campus. We are looking at Hansen, at this site of where the old wing, replacing that from 1957, the historical wing complementing that to, again, reinforce this idea of a quad space, a collective space between the two buildings in that particular location. So one of the other things we did, because we like to do this as academics, I guess, but was to do a kind of lexicon or a survey of the architecture on the campus of Rice, which is to me really fascinating because Rice was always an incubator for architecture over the years of different styles and phases and movements of architecture, and has a long history of having some of the most progressive architecture in the country. Of course, the first buildings were in this classical style, which aligned and were consistent with the master plan, the original one, through the 50s and 60s. Modernism made a very strong showing on campus, love it or hate it. I still find a lot of these buildings quite Interesting in the 80s, postmodern architects of quite, quite renowned, such as James Sterling's addition to the architecture building, Anderson Hall, Caesar Pelle's work, Michael Graves, had an enormous impact, I think, on the campus through the 80s, as well as, I think, a sort of collection of quite excellent contemporary buildings from Thomas Pfeiffer's Pavilion, Kieran Timberlake, who are pioneers in sustainability as well as Michael Maltzan's Moody Center for the Arts. So with this in mind, as a kind of backdrop, we wanted to think about how we might replace the 57 building, which is inaccessible, it's problematic, it's aged, with a building that's up to date, that's contemporary and accessible, and how that might fit within this more immediate context of Hanszen College, how it relates to Weiss and Will Rice, Sid Rich, and how it will situate itself both in the sort of more immediate context and the one directly to Hansen. So our proposal was to complement the historical wing to the north with a new wing. It's relatively high density, meaning relatively a lot of beds, 166. How that will situate itself in this new campus, and also being a kind of pioneering building in timber construction. We've been working on Sid Rich, which is a much more urban building in terms of its relationship to Main Street. So in a way, really shifted gears in terms of how we thought about Hansen and how that might work. Again, the immediate context for this new wing, this new building, is the old Hansen, which of course you're quite familiar with, the Hansen Commons on the upper right, which is this more modern building, which has a double height arcade facing the quad, as well as the Weiss College building, also from the same architects, as well as the Will Rice College building, which is also a relatively contemporary building. So the existing site that we had to work on was in the area of the quad. This red footprint is the existing 57 building. Our site is meant to be located here, shown in red, between the Hansen Quad and to the south. And the challenge for us was really how could we articulate this building mass to, in a sense, fit within this relatively complex site, sort of tailoring it to fit with the idea of generating dormitory rooms and common spaces and how that might work. So we started with a very simple diagram of the possible building volume that would work with sort of in this sort of diagram that I'm showing. And then began to shift and slide those volumes against them, both to kind of break down the kind of mass of the building, but also to make it fit better, to tailor this volume better to this particular site. Another thing we wanted to do was to lower, and to the left, this is the quad side, to lower the building on that side, to bring it more in scale with the historical wing across from it, and to have a higher volume facing to the south and towards Main Street. The next idea was to, Rice is predominantly a campus of roofed buildings, hip roofs, shed roofs, was to articulate the building in a series of shed roofs, again, to help scale the building down, but also contextually to put it into a kind of dialogue with the neighboring buildings. So in this sketch model, this sort of massing model, you see how the building sort of slips into this space between Hansen and Weiss, sort of blocking Weiss up a little bit to the other side, and strengthening the relationship to the Hansen Quad. That space is something more private and belonging exclusively to Hansen, as well as having a strong address to the south and to the Grove next to it. So in this view, you see how the massing is even though it is a relatively high density building, bringing that in scale to the Hansen Commons and to the old Hansen wing. What I mean by in scale, to a similar height between these three buildings that form the Hansen quad. This is sort of jumping ahead. This is a model, a sketch model. We work in models in our shop that shows some of the ambitions of the facade articulation. We wanted to work with a kind of depth of the facade that's not flat, with these, the idea of doubling windows. I'll go into this in more detail with the elevations, but this is a kind of quick image of the massing and articulation of the building, which you can see better here from the quad side, looking from where the grove back in front of the grove would be in terms of the material palette of the building, brick and plaster, how that's articulated through the massing of the building, as opposed to the south-facing facade again, which is a story higher, facing to the south and to the west side of the campus. Just to talk about mass timber construction specific to this project, again, this is a pilot project, a kind of pioneering project in the sense it's the first mass timber project on campus. The structure is post and beam, which means you have posts or columns and beams made out of a glue laminated timber. The floors are CLT, which is cross laminated timber, a kind of almost like a plywood kind of construction to create this kind of skeleton or the base structure of the building. Again, it's attractive because it's quite sustainable. It's also a lightweight structure. It can be built off-site and then brought onto campus. So as said, it's the first mass timber construction on campus. It's already been awarded a grant from the US Department of Agriculture. It will be in line with Rice's environmental agenda, and quite interestingly, though it may not speak for this building, I think Rice does own 50,000 acres of timber in Louisiana, which in a sense could be a kind of crop that could be harvested for future buildings on campus. So our hope is with this building to be a kind of prototype for future construction on campus that can do these things, that can provide a low carbon footprint, that has this efficiency through prefabrication. It's economical, it's precise, it reduces time on site, these kind of logical, pragmatic aspects of it, and can be locally produced. But at the same time, it's I think it's extremely beautiful material, in a sense, very haptic, warm material. You can see the timber house in glulam construction behind my screen here of a house I just completed in the same kind of construction, which is extremely livable kind of material to be around. In terms of logistics, we can build this building in Arkansas, in Conway, and just ship it down to Houston. So in a sense, it is a regional material that can be sourced from not far away. As I said, it's extremely beautiful. This is an example in Oregon of post and beam construction in glue laminated with a CLT. Again, this cross laminated timber floor decks, which we will then coat in concrete to improve the kind of acoustical performance of them. So it's quite a cool material in the sense of its ease of moving and its aesthetic beauty, I think. The new Hansen dorms, to kind of zoom in on the building itself, we're developing both single rooms, doubles, and RA rooms. So this is an example in our model. This is kind of a view looking from above down into the room as a single here with a storage space here. The bathrooms are shared in a common hallway. which look like this from the inside, a study space, a bed. It has a certain amount of flexibility in terms of how you furnish it, how you can move the furnishing around. But what you can see is the sort of visibility of the construction. So the ceilings will be the exposed timber, as well as the beam or sort of header over the window, and columns are visible. The concrete floor will also be visible. So the rooms will be quite robust in a way. I think we wanted to achieve a kind of loft-like character for these spaces. This is an example of a typical double room, again, which is flexible, which has its own designated bathroom. Here, a kind of entrance foyer here with storage as a kind of base type, or the most, the kind of majority of the rooms will be this kind of room with both looking at the kind of window or facade side and looking back towards the entrance and the view. On the right, again, can be flexible, can be rearranged in terms of furniture, beds, desks, how you want to use it. And then we also have generate corner rooms, which have windows on the corners, views in both directions. These are double rooms, which are quite nice. You even get an extra window here next to the Dolly Parton poster, which we can provide. And also, so you have three kind of different types of rooms for this kind of a layout. The building layout, or in a sense, the floor plans work this way. At the ground floor, we have a passage, which I think is quite nice, and it extends to the old Hansen wing, which serves as an entrance to the lobby or to an RA suite here at ground level. And you can see the distribution of single rooms as well as double rooms at this floor. A typical floor works this way with this combination of, and again, we have 38 singles to 64 double rooms, but you see the distribution of rooms in this floor plan. And you can also see we generate common spaces such as these outdoor terraces or loggias, I'd call them, on the corner here, as well as places in the corridor where people can sit and work or meet and talk. So to use, in a way, to be as efficient as possible, but to generate as much architectural benefits as we can with a building of this type. The fifth floor, or the top floor, again, it becomes a kind of single loaded suite of rooms, both double and single, as well as another RA suite here. As if you remember from the model, this has a clear story lighting to the corridor. These rooms also have a kind of higher roof or shed roof over them. So I think it generates a lot of differences in terms of types of rooms and where they're located, views and orientation. So I think in a sense that will be quite dynamic in these floor plans. The RA suites are super nice. The one on the ground floor has light and view orientation on both sides. Similar to the rooms, the singles and doubles, we also wanted this have a kind of sort of rough and ready, loft character to concrete floors. Again, exposing the construction timber wherever we can, and generate another RA suite at the fifth floor, which is daylit and has views on one side, but has the added benefit of these high sloping shed roofs on this higher space. So this is an example of what that space would be like. Again, loft character, open kitchen, open living and dining space as a kind of enclosed loft spaces. The common spaces that I talked about are in the lobby space is designated as a common space. These three exterior terraces or loggias are given over as common spaces, as well as these what we calling reading nooks along the corridor on the upper levels. So again, the Commons building is down here to the left, adjacent to this building, but even within the new building, we wanted to generate as much common space as we could. So in the drawing here, this is an example of the lobby space where you could sit here, hang out. There's a chalkboard, there's a pinup board in the back, there's a screen. So you could project movies here, you could get information here, you could use it as a meeting point. But this is really the entrance to this residential wing. Other spaces, again, the corridor wanting to have some quality of its own, it again expresses the structure. There are views out of the corridor on both ends, as well as on the right. It's daylit where it slides. Again, that kind of shifting plan brings daylight within there, as well as places to sit and work within the corridor while waiting or hanging out, which is shown in a bit more detail here, where you can see where you can sit here, you can plug in, you can meet people here. And this also has the added benefit that it's adjacent to these outdoor terraces, which you can use for workspaces, again, meeting spaces or party spaces here. So that's an added benefit to that, the corridor and how it connects to these outdoor terraces or loggias, as I would call them. The facade as another sort of theme within this overall building. We've been really working hard and intensively, again, in the last couple of months, doing lots and lots of Zoom conferences and meetings on this issue. But the idea of the facade was, again, we see this as a modern building, and we wanted to do a modern and progressive forward-looking building, but also wanted to understand the history. And the history of Rice was that, in a sense, residential colleges would be slightly different than institutional buildings or classroom buildings in the sense of using plaster, using brick, and producing a more vernacular kind of architecture. So this kind of nonchalance or informality was something we wanted to, register in this new building. So these are close-ups of the old Hanszen wing, which consists of brick and tile and a kind of structured plaster material palette that we wanted to respond to. This is an example of the 57 building, which was also predominantly in brick and some tile, which we want to reuse, as well as the Commons, which evolved from the 57 version of it, which was super modern, to the 2002 version from Machado Silvetti, teachers of ours at Harvard, who did this kind of more monumental double height arcade in brick and beige and red brick coursing. So our initial studies looked like this. We wanted the facade to have a kind of surface depth. It works in a kind of shingling fashion of stepping over, wanting to take advantage of the strong southern light, this idea of light and shadow, articulating the facade and not simply being a flat surface that's either in light or in shadow, but to play with the kind of depth of that. So in the more recent versions of this facade, we started to give more hierarchy and more dynamic facade in terms of pairing windows. Again, if you look at the historical building, you see how windows are grouped. You can see how they're offset, sort of quoting, the arched entrance at that sort of entrance passage through here, riffing on this idea of towers, marking or forming kind of tower-like element both at the entrance and booking ended at the other side, as well as on the end here, as a way of, again, referring to the historical buildings, but without copying them directly. So again, this is also a palette of plaster, a metal standing seam roof, brick in the towers, and then tile infills in and around the windows. So the palette then looks like this. On the right is the St. Joe brick from Louisiana, which is typical to Rice University. Beautiful tiles in terracotta, even salvaging some of the mosaic tile from the 1957 Hansen wing, which we'll use in the entrance ceiling or soffit, and plaster, but even that material, not simply putting it flat, but raking it, giving it a texture, which will also play in light and shadow, so that the materials have a kind of richness and depth in themselves within this building facade. So you could see where those materials would be placed or located within the facade. This is the plaster. These are areas for the tile. You can see my cursor, and the brick and the base, and again, these tower elements here. This is pronounced at a corner, again, where the entrance throughway to this Hansen wing is here, with these three open air terrace loggias above it, and then a standing seam metal roof above it. And these windows here are the clear stories, which light the corridor at the fifth level. So in contrast, in a way, to Weiss, which is very simple, kind of punched facade, ours is much more articulated, I think materially more diverse, and more in line with the historical quad at this view looking to the south. Iconography was another thing, another aspect, and particular history to this college in terms of the terracotta panels, the Guardian, the Passage, are things that we want to make specific to this college. The blue tiles, either by reinstating some of those ideas, such as the Passage, the blue tiles are something we want to salvage and reuse, replace or relocate some of these things. One of the things we wanted to bring on board were the college crests and mosaic tiles, which are, you know, quite beautiful, and to bring them into the new building. So the crests can be located here through the Passage at the entrance to the Hansen lobby. And this soffit or ceiling, I think we have enough material then to place those really beautiful mosaic tiles into that ceiling space, which again play very nicely in the changing light. So this is a view from the Commons, which is to say, we want this to be an integrated building. We want there to be an ongoing sort of dialogue between these buildings to form a new whole, a new entity with Hansen, and particularly for the quad. And again, as a place, you know, not simply to go to sleep at night, but, you know, really a place to reside, you know, a community that this will provide, a community, a place to learn, a place to study, and to, as I did in college, I mean, really a place to meet friends and friends for life. So it's important as a piece of architecture, but I think it's also incredibly important as a place in a particular time. So I'll finish with this slide. And thank you for your patience. This is one of the, I haven't done a lot of these Zoom presentations, but thanks for bearing with me. And I hope that the presentation was enlightening to you. I will go to, I'll let Fabiola, do you want to make any comments or open it up to questions?
Thank you, Frank, for this incredible presentation. Right now we are, yes, let's do this kind of wonderful, no, here we cannot do that. I wanted to do the electronic, I'm lost in the webinar.
Oh,
real one.
You do your own hands, they work pretty good.
So we are opening right now for questions. We will try to answer as much as we can during this time. Nikita Gangla, our president, will be moderating it. So Frank, you can click on the Q&A questions setting
Okay.
on the bottom of the
Yeah.
screen for you to read the questions.
Okay.
Or everybody else that will be.
Yeah, so we can just have everyone submit their questions via the Q&A function. So I'll just read the questions out as we answer them, and we'll have someone who's on this panel answer them to the best of our ability. Yeah, so we can jump right in. So the first question that I think that Frank and Anzi could answer is the question, how have hurricane and/or flood considerations impacted the design?
So I should answer this or Nancy?
Whoever you think is best.
So I could take a stab at it. How have hurricane and or flood considerations impacted the design? Well, I will tell you that the city of Houston makes a whole lot of determinations for us. There are a lot of code requirements that we have to meet. So that is what influences the design. The city of Houston has a regulation that determined that the building had to be, I believe, 3 to 5 feet above grade. So we'll see that this building is much taller than we would probably have liked it to be because of the flood regulations. For hurricane, it's really just code requirements. We don't go in and do anything extra or special to the design because of hurricanes. We make sure that it meets the code to make sure it meets the required wind resistance.
Yeah, I think we're 4 feet up above the ground with that. I think there were other considerations such as the metal roof, which are more hurricane resistant, the material, the structure also in timber to make sure that the structure can withhold stresses. So that was part of the engineering also in relationship to hurricane considerations.
Yeah. And Frank mentioned the metal roof. There's a question here. What are the reasons for the metal roof rather than tile? So that is one of the reasons.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it was a long debate over whether or not we should do tile or metal roofs. Quiet as it's kept, there have only been 2 buildings that we have built on campus in the last 20 years that have tile roof. The university has been steadily moving away from tile roofs, especially in design of residential colleges. I don't know that we're doing it on purpose. It just comes to a place where they're lower maintenance. They work better with the particular contemporary designs that we've been doing lately. But we did talk about the tile roof, and we eventually, in the end, still landed on a metal roof for this building.
We did. We talked about it a lot, all the way to the top. And but it is actually consistent with the buildings that it's around. I also think it's consistent with, and conceptually, with the timber construction. I think the idea of putting a lightweight metal roof on timber construction makes a lot of sense to me versus a masonry, even though we are using some brick. So I think that's also an advantage. But I think for me, it's also somehow a contemporary response to how one would roof a building like this. And again, as Anzi was saying, it's consistent with most of the buildings with sloped roofs in the last 20, 25 years on campus.
Yeah, thank you for those answers. So the next question is, why are there outdoor loggias? It feels like, you know, Houston is very humid and no one is going to want to sit outside in these. And I think one of the students could actually answer this.
Yeah, so the idea of these outside terraces kind of works into what we want to get out of the building. And Hansen has moved towards having a very strong commons culture, and having those terraces situated where they are close to that the commons area, and the quad has these kinds of common spaces to be used best by these different floors. And the question of like having outdoor seating, I think generally we've seen the sun deck and moon deck being used to a large extent, you know, outside of restriction years, and we think they can be like widely used. And as they're covered where the sun shouldn't be too like strong in those areas, and the general seating arrange the place where it is has a good breeze that usually flows through from Weiss to Hansen when there are days with wind. So generally, I feel like the possibility of having like outdoor spaces was best utilized by placing those terraces there, and they should be helpful for continuing to bolster the quad and commons culture in that area.
I would also say that was one of the biggest like pieces of feedback we got from students, was to make sure that Moon Deck or some version of it was replicated in the new building and they still had an outdoor space like that.
Thank you to Rose and Shams. So the next question is from Diane, and she says that she's a Hansen old timer and an Archie grad, and she's actually sorry to see that the 8-person suite layout is gone and the lack of balcony type space overlooking the quad. Again, would one of the students want to talk about this and what we're anticipating?
Yeah, so from the beginning of the project, we had a lot of feedback coming from students about what we wanted to get out of the building. And one of the largest things that we want to do is create a better bathroom ratio, for example, and having a better quality of like bathrooms for students. And the new section building plans that we have at the moment, we have a 2 students to 1 restroom ratio, which is much better than the 4 to 1 that we have at the moment here. But then also beyond that, there was also some ideas about, again, bolstering that commons culture that works into having these suites be providing a nice living space, but then having things like the reading nooks and terraces situating closer to the quad area to keep that commons culture much stronger moving forward as this new building gets situated at Hansen, and then we start to make it into like a very great living and home space for Hansenites.
Yeah. I'd like to add that like Hansen is really, really proud of our commons culture. And we have seen like in a lot of the newer colleges that have been built with which do have these suites, they tend to have like this lack of commons culture because people tend to stay in their rooms more and kind of build silos within their suites. We specifically didn't want that because we wanted this core like Hansen commons culture. Everyone comes together outside to remain alive. And so that was pretty much a big design consideration for us.
Which also kind of feeds into it. So in those, for example, for like Duncan and McMurtry, for example, they have very strong floor culture due to common spaces that are very closed in their floors. So the common spaces in Hansen new section, like these terraces and reading nooks, as you can like kind of notice in the design, are very facing towards the quad and the commons area. So the individuals using those common spaces will be in view and, you know, feel more connected to the common and public spaces of Hanszen College.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jams. Okay, so the next question I think would be best for for Frank to answer. So the question is, how are ductwork and ceiling lighting wiring done? Also, was the fire code approval straightforward?
It was, well, let's start with the fire code approval was not straightforward in the sense that, again, timber construction of this type is relatively new, but we did get an allowance for building within these height limits. So that was approved, whereas a building, say, such as Sid Rich was not. Ductwork, ceiling, lighting, because it's a relatively exposed building, meaning the structure is the building, what you see, we don't have a lot of gypboard, a lot of hung ceilings. A lot of that went into vertical chases. So if I went back to the presentations of those down views of the dorm rooms, you would see chases in there, which is a clever way of putting ductwork and things. So it's not running through your corridors and it's not running through your dorm rooms. So, so we had to be very careful in terms of allocating spaces that are sort of service spaces versus the serve spaces of rooms and common spaces and even corridors. We didn't want a lot of wires and lighting and things hanging out. So we've been careful to put that stuff in the background so you're looking at structure or partition walls.
Thank you for that answer, Frank. Okay, so the next question that we have actually received a lot of times is just general questions about the timeline for construction. So when is the current new section going to be torn down? How long will it take to build new sections, so on and so forth? And I think for that, Anzi or Fabiola, would you like to?
So the new wing will be torn down the moment you vacate it in May, like the next day. We expect that demolition will take about a month, if not shorter. Buildings come down really fast. And then construction will begin shortly thereafter and will run until July of the summer of 2022. So pretty fast.
Yeah, so during that time, the current plan, like when new section is being built, the current plan is that Hansenites on campus move into Sid Richardson College. Yeah, so Hansen will be a little bit split up. Fabiola, you look like you have something to say on that.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, to the old building of Sid Richardson College, right?
Yeah.
That is going to be empty and is going to be transformed for the graduate students. So before that, Hansenites are going to be living over there. But as everything is going to happen so quickly, so it's going to be over a year only.
Okay, thank you, Fabiola. The next question is, how do you plan to incorporate HVAC elements into the dorm room design? And I think this should be a question for Frank.
HVAC again are incorporated, into the, to the chase system basically. This mechanical areas that we've designated so that they're designated for each room. Again, I don't expect them to be, elements in the question to be present. Grill work coming through the drop ceiling above either the bathroom areas or the single room entrance storage area. So in that area, we can use that area for bringing HVAC into the rooms.
Yeah, if you guys are familiar, I don't know the person who asked him the question, but if you're familiar with Duncan and McMurtry and the new wing of Will Rice, new wing of Baker, we have fan coil units, standing fan coil units that are kind of furred into the sheetrock, and you probably don't even notice them.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question that we currently have, are there any improvements being made to old section to not make there be a huge imbalance in the room quality between the new wing and old section?
Old section is amazing. I mean, it's a historic dormitory. So no, there aren't any plans to do any major renovations to the old section. Over the years, we had been doing, moderate or just kind of doing wholesale renovations to each college as their time came. But instead of doing a renovation to the old historic wing, we're building a new wing for you. But we haven't honestly heard a whole lot of complaints about your historic wing. So
one thing I wanted to add from the student perspective is that it's true. Currently, our new section has more problems than our old section. Has been renovated less recently, but that was something that we kept in mind, that we were getting a brand new building and that there might now kind of be this imbalance. So one thing that we kept in mind, we did want a new building. We want to replace new section and continue moving forward. But we wanted to shift all those common spaces to being accessible to everyone. So one small change is that like the few common spaces that are currently existing in old section will be moving to our commons spaces, with the idea of at least all of the spaces that we share as Hansenites will be in one common space, rather than the new section also having these fun common spaces that are only accessible to the residents there.
Thanks, Rose and Anzi. So the next question that we have is from Laura. How many more students will be able to live at Hansen with the new wing as opposed to the current structure? And I think Anzi, you could also take that.
So you will have a total of 290 beds when we finish. I think right now you've got, how many beds do you have now? I think you're getting an extra 48 beds, 46 beds, if that helps. So you got 166 at the new wing and 124 at the old wing. I've probably answered it now several different ways. I hope that answered the question.
Nikita, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have time for maybe one more question. We will try to get to answer the other questions at some point, I guess, if you can contact us.
Yeah, sure. So let's just take one final question. So one question that we have is, has COVID changed this timeline at all? Do you have a plan in case conditions don't improve and social distancing protocols are still in place?
COVID has not changed our plan in any significant way. We have been having conversations about, what happens if we still have to have a quarantine college. It's something that we will deal with. But we are going to continue. We're building Sidrich now, and today they said they had over 300 people working on site. We haven't had a case of COVID in months on campus related to that site. So we expect that we know how to do it, and we're going to do it even better for you guys in the summer.
Thank you, Hanszen. And thank you, Frank, for your incredible presentation.